Okay, so today we're diving into something pretty fascinating. I think a really thought-provoking article we found online called Global Economics, Trade, Peace, and Prosperity.
Hmm.
And I think it's going to be a good one because, it's a dense topic, but we're going to try to break it down and make it really accessible and help people understand how all these big global systems are connected.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it's like you said, it's dense, but the core idea, I think, is so important. It's about how global economics trade and even the pursuit of peace. They're all kind of intertwined.
Totally. And the article, it throws out some surprising ideas,
Yeah.
Like you wouldn't think that gold would be a safe haven asset in times of economic turmoil.
Right. But it's true.
Yeah, it's fascinating how that works.
Yeah, and then there's some other things that are maybe a little bit controversial, like slashing military budgets to invest in peace.
Yeah, that's definitely going to spark some debate.
Yeah, I think so too. But let's just jump right in and see what the article has to say.
Okay, sounds good. So right off the bat, they jump into this topic of trade wars.
Right.
Which on the surface, you're like, okay, yeah, trade wars, they're probably not a good thing. But this article goes deeper, and it's even though they're kind of initiated with this idea of, protecting domestic industries, it can actually end up hurting everyone.
Absolutely. That short-term protectionism often leads to long-term problems, like inefficiency in the economy overall and international tensions.
Right, nobody wins.
Exactly.
And one thing that really stood out to me was this concept of a cascade effect. When one country starts imposing tariffs, then other countries, they retaliate. And then it just spirals out of control.
Yeah, it's like a domino effect.
Yeah.
One thing leads to another, and suddenly you have these disrupted supply chains, prices going up for consumers everywhere.
It's like global chaos, basically.
Pretty much, yeah.
And there's this term that the article uses called capital flight, which, I don't know. I wasn't super familiar with that term before reading this.
Right.
So, what is capital flight, and, how does it play into all this?
So capital flight, it's basically when investors start getting nervous.
Okay.
They lose confidence in a country's economy, and they pull their money out.
Makes sense.
And they move it to other countries that seem more stable. And this can happen for a bunch of reasons,
Right.
Political instability is a big one. But the article also points out that things like currency devaluation can trigger it.
Yeah, they were talking about how countries might devalue their currency to offset the impact of tariffs, to make their exports cheaper.
Right, but it's a risky move.
Yeah, it seems like it.
Because while it might boost exports in the short term, it can lead to inflation, which is when prices for everything start going up.
Yeah, that's not good.
No, it erodes the value of people's savings and can scare off those investors even more.
Leading to even more capital flight.
Exactly.
A vicious cycle.
All these things are connected. It's like a giant web. It's a complex system.
And it's so interesting how the article ties economic policy to the risk of conflict.
Mm-hmm.
They're saying that when countries are just focused on their own economic interests, it creates this environment of mistrust.
Yeah, it breeds resentment.
Yeah, and that can make it harder to cooperate on global issues.
Absolutely.
And what's even more concerning is that it can make conflict more likely.
Right, because you don't have those strong relationships, those diplomatic channels to resolve disputes peacefully.
It's they're saying that economic instability can be a breeding ground for conflict.
Yeah, that's a really powerful point, I think.
It is, and then they bring up gold as this historical safe haven asset.
Yeah, it's like a financial fortress.
Right, when everything else is going crazy, people turn to gold.
Because it's tangible, you can hold it in your hand.
Yeah, it's a real thing.
And it has this long history of holding its value even when currencies are fluctuating wildly.
Do you have any historical examples that really demonstrate that?
Oh yeah, definitely look at the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh yeah, that was a crazy time.
It was when the markets crashed and everybody was panicking. The price of gold went through the roof.
Because people were I need something stable.
Exactly. They were losing faith in banks and the stock market. So they turned to gold.
Wow, that's so interesting.
It's a psychological thing too.
Yes.
It represents security in times of uncertainty.
That's a safety blanket almost.
Kind of, yeah.
So it seems like the article is kind of building towards this alternative approach,
Yeah.
a way to break out of this cycle of protectionism and instability.
Right. They're proposing a pretty bold idea.
What is it?
They're saying we should shift towards free trade with reasonable tariffs
Okay.
and at the same time drastically reduce military spending.
Wow, that's a big shift.
It is, but their argument is that by removing trade barriers and fostering economic interdependence, we can create a world that's both more prosperous and more peaceful.
So it's like a win-win.
Exactly. Everyone benefits.
I mean, it sounds good in theory, but like, isn't free trade often criticized for leading to job losses, especially in developed countries?
Yeah, that's a common concern, and the article acknowledges it.
Okay.
But they argue that the long-term benefits outweigh those potential downsides.
Like what kind of benefits?
Well, for one thing, free trade leads to increased economic efficiency, which means we can produce more goods and services with fewer resources.
Okay, that makes sense.
And that translates into lower prices for consumers.
So everybody's saving money.
Right. And then there's the argument that free trade promotes innovation and competition, which leads to better products and services.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, it's all about creating a more dynamic global economy.
So how do they address the issue of job losses, though?
Well, they suggest that governments can take steps to mitigate the negative impacts. Things like retraining programs for workers who are displaced and investments in new industries.
So it's not just like, oh, well, tough luck.
No, it's about making sure that everyone benefits from these changes.
That's good.
And then there's the other side of their proposition, the reduction in military spending.
Yeah, that's a pretty radical idea.
It is, but they make a compelling case for it. They call it the peace dividend.
The peace dividend?
Yeah, the idea is that by reducing military expenditures, countries can free up massive resources to invest in other areas, like education, healthcare, infrastructure, renewable energy.
It's like taking money from something that's destructive and putting it towards something that's constructive.
Exactly. It's about shifting priorities from war to peace and prosperity.
And it's so interesting how the article ties this all together. It's not just about economics, it's about creating a more peaceful world.
Right. It's about recognizing that peace and prosperity are interconnected. You can't have one without the other.
And it goes beyond just like policy changes too.
Right. They talk about the importance of fostering global citizenship and cultural exchange.
Yeah, like building bridges between people.
Exactly. Promoting empathy, understanding, addressing global inequality.
So it's like a holistic approach.
It is. It's about recognizing that we're all part of this global community and we need to work together to create a better future.
So what can we do, as individuals? Is it all up to governments and policymakers?
Well, policy changes are definitely important, but individual actions matter too.
Like what kind of things?
Well, we can support organizations that are working to promote peace and understanding. We can advocate for fair trade practices. We can educate ourselves about global issues.
And like on a more personal level?
We can make an effort to connect with people from different cultures.
Right, just like expand our horizons.
Exactly, because even small actions can have a ripple effect.
So as we kind of wrap up our deep dive into this article, it seems like the main takeaway is that we have a choice to make. We can stick with this path of like isolationism and conflict.
Right, or we can choose a different path.
One that's based on cooperation and shared prosperity.
And a commitment to building a more peaceful world.
It's a hopeful message, but it's also challenging.
It is. It calls on us to think beyond our own immediate self-interest.
And to consider like the long-term well-being of humanity as a whole.
Exactly. It's a big ask, but I think it's worth striving for.
Yeah, absolutely. So like as a final thought,
Yeah.
I want you to consider this. What if your country decided to take a portion of its military budget and redirect it towards something like funding renewable energy research or providing universal health care? What kind of impact do you think that would have on your society, on the world?
That's a really interesting question.
It is, right?
It makes you think about priorities.
Yeah, and about the possibilities,
Yeah, what we could achieve if we shifted our focus.
Exactly. So keep exploring these ideas, folks, because understanding how global economics and the pursuit of peace are all interconnected, it's crucial for building a better future.
Couldn't agree more.
Thanks for joining us for this deep dive.
My pleasure.
Thanks for watching World Matters. Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more AI-driven insights. See you in the next episode.